penthouse on the 42nd floor of Sterling Tower was the most beautiful prison in New York City. Floor-to-ceiling windows, shiny white floors, a kitchen nobody ever used, and in the middle of it all, sitting in a wheelchair by the window, staring at a city he no longer felt part of, was Elliot Ashford, 38 years old, a billionaire, the founder of Ashford Capital, one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast, deaf, unable to walk, and completely, utterly alone. But it had not always been this way. 3 years ago, Elliot Ashford was unstoppable. When he walked into a room, people stood up. When he made a phone call, markets moved. Then one evening, he came home early with a surprise planned. Candles, his wife's favorite wine, a gift flown in from Paris. He was smiling when he opened the bedroom door. His wife Vivienne was in bed, and Daniel, his best friend since college, the man who owned a stake in everything Elliot had ever built, was beside her. Nobody screamed. Nobody moved. Vivienne simply pulled the sheet up slowly, like Elliot was a stranger who had walked into the wrong room. Elliot walked out without a coat, without a phone, without a word. He walked through Manhattan until his legs had nothing left. A stranger found him hours later in Central Park and called an ambulance. That was the last thing he clearly remembered. Everything after, gone. Just blank. The doctors called it dissociative amnesia, where the mind erases a memory too painful to carry. His mind had seen something it could not survive, so it erased it, like it never happened. He woke up in a hospital bed, and the world was completely silent. Not peaceful silent. The kind of silent that feels like something has been stolen from you. The shock had been so great that his brain stopped processing sound altogether. His ears were fine, but his mind had decided it was done listening. And then his legs followed. The doctors called it psychosomatic paralysis, where emotional pain becomes so heavy the body feels it physically. No accident, no surgery could explain it. The damage lived entirely inside him, invisible to every scan, every test, every specialist in the city. He knew something terrible had happened. He knew it involved Vivienne and Daniel, but the full picture never came back clearly enough to face. And so he could not heal from something he could not fully remember. In the weeks that followed, Elliot taught himself to lip read. It was the only connection he had left to the world. It was on the 3rd day of Elliot's hospital stay that a doctor in charge recognized his face from a magazine cover and made a call to his next of kin, Vivienne, his wife. She walked in looking perfect, hair done, lips painted red, white lilies in her hands. She pulled the doctor aside before she even reached Elliot's room and asked him to tell her everything. The doctor told her. And then he mentioned, almost casually, that Elliot had no memory of that night. What he saw, what broke him, gone, completely gone. Vivienne made him repeat it. He doesn't remember, not a single detail. The relief that moved through her was almost embarrassing. She thanked the doctor, smiled politely, and the moment he turned away, she pressed her lips together so hard her teeth hurt. Because the smile that came was not a sad one. Now you might wonder, where was his wife during all of this? Oh, Vivienne Ashford was very much present. Tall, polished, and beautiful, Vivienne had married Elliot 10 years ago with a smile that could win over anyone. She wore designer clothes, hosted charity events, and spoke about her poor dear husband with just enough sadness to seem devoted. But behind closed doors, she was a woman on a very different schedule. She took her phone calls openly in the penthouse bedroom, laughing and whispering while Elliot sat in his wheelchair by the window. Because Vivian had convinced herself of one very important thing. He can't hear a word. He's basically furniture, she had said once. Deaf and stuck in that chair. What's he going to do? The man on the other end of that call laughed. That man was Daniel Mercer, Elliot's best friend. And for the past 14 months, the man sleeping with Elliot's wife. Their arrangement had grown far beyond an affair. Over secret messages and weekend trips abroad, the two of them had been quietly moving money out of Ashford Capital into hidden accounts. Close to $40 million already shifted. And Vivian was pregnant, not with her husband's child, but Daniel's. Elliot had not touched her since he fell into depression. She could not pin it on him. There was one thing standing between Vivian and everything she wanted: Elliot's will. A clause written by his late father's lawyers stated that if Elliot died within the first 10 years of marriage with no children, his entire estate reverted to the Ashford family trust. Vivian would get nothing. The 10-year mark was 6 weeks away. All she had to do was wait. And in the meantime, she made his world as small as possible. Managing Elliot had become an inconvenience Vivian had not planned for. She cycled through caregivers the way she changed handbags. And who could blame him? This was a man who had lost everything: his hearing, his legs, a life he never bargained for. He didn't want strangers or sympathy from people paid to give it. Every new face was a reminder of how far he had fallen. So he sat there, still and silent, carrying a pain so heavy you could feel it the moment you walked into the room. And one by one, it made them leave. 7 caregivers in 4 months. The 8th quit before she even took off her coat. Vivian posted the listing again. And that was when Clara Bennett walked through the door. Clara was 24 years old, big brown eyes, a soft mouth that smiled even when things were hard, and something in her expression that said, "I have been through the fire, and I am still here." Her mother Ruth had died when Clara was 16. Breast cancer, caught too late. Not because Ruth wasn't strong. She was the kind of woman who held everything together with quiet hands and a steady voice. But she had ignored the signs for too long, the way mothers do when they are too busy keeping everyone else alive to tend to themselves. By the time the doctors found it, it had already spread too far. She fought anyway, right to the end. And Clara had watched every single day of that fight. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Get checked. Do not wait. Do not tell yourself it is nothing. Ruth waited. And Clara grew up without her mother. Her father had tried his best after that. But grief does strange things to gentle men. George Bennett found his way to underground gambling dens and never found his way back out. 3 weeks ago, a knife ended his life during a game gone wrong. The man responsible was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. But no sentence brings a person back. Clara was holding her father's hand when he took his last breath. Now it was just her and her younger sister Lily, 18, brilliant, accepted to study engineering at NYU. Clara was determined to make that happen, whatever it took. She had $11 in her account the morning she saw the listing. A few days later, her phone screen showed one listing that made her stop. Live-in caregiver needed. Immediate start. Competitive salary. Sterling Tower, Midtown Manhattan. She ironed her only blazer, printed her resume at the library, and took the subway uptown. Vivian answered the door in a silk robe with a glass of wine at 11 in the morning. She looked Clara over like furniture she wasn't sure would match the room. "You're younger than I expected." "I cared for my mother through a terminal illness for 2 years," Clara said. "My husband is deaf and uses a wheelchair. He is difficult. I need someone discreet, someone who won't ask questions." "I'm here to work," Clara said simply. Vivian stepped aside. "You start Monday, 6 days a week. Don't get too comfortable. People don't tend to last here." Clara looked at the card she was handed, then looked up. "Thank you, Mrs. Ashford." Vivian turned away without another word. Monday morning, Vivian was leaving as Clara arrived. Luggage, sunglasses, a driver waiting. "Wellness trip, back Thursday. Don't call me unless something is on fire." The elevator closed. Clara stood alone in the penthouse, exhaled, warmed the breakfast from the fridge, and carried it to the closed door at the end of the hallway. She knocked. Nothing. She knocked again and opened the door. Elliot Ashford sat by the window with his back to her, still, silent. The morning light fell across him in pale gold strips, and even worn down by everything life had done to him, Clara could see that this was a man who had once been extraordinary. She set the tray on the table beside him. He didn't look at her. She arranged it carefully, stepped back, sat in the chair across from him, and waited. A minute passed. Then, without warning, Elliot swept the entire tray off the table. The plate shattered. The juice splashed across the floor. Clara didn't flinch. She looked at the mess, then at him. He was watching her, waiting for her to cry or shout or run like the others. She did none of those things. She walked to the kitchen, found a cloth, came back, cleaned up every piece without a word, made him another plate, set it on the table, and sat back down. Elliot stared at her. She looked back, not with pity, not with fear, just steadiness, like she had seen worse and was not going anywhere. He didn't touch the food, but he didn't throw it either. The days passed. Clara built a rhythm. Breakfast, medications, reading by the window in the afternoons while he sat in his usual silence. She never pushed. She never hovered. She gave him space, because a wounded thing needs room to breathe. On the 6th day, as she turned to leave after setting down his lunch, she felt a light tap on her arm. She turned. Elliot pointed at the chair across from him. "Sit." She sat. He reached for the notepad on his side table and held it up. "Why are you still here?" "Because I need this job," she said slowly, so he could read her lips. "And because I think you need someone who won't run." He studied her face. He wrote again. "Everyone runs." "I know," she said softly. "I almost did too, but I've learned that the things worth staying for never come easy." Elliot looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he almost smiled. 2 weeks in, they had built their own quiet language. She spoke. He lip-read and wrote back. Sometimes he signed. He had taught himself from a book in the apartment. And Clara learned quickly, picking up each sign with her whole attention. One evening he passed her the notepad. "Tell me something true." So she told him about her father, the gambling, the debt, the knife, about standing in a hospital corridor at 5 in the morning while a doctor told her there was nothing more they could do, about Lily, her laugh, her engineering textbooks, the scholarship applications they filled out together past midnight on a dying laptop. When she finished, she looked at her hands. Elliot had not moved. He wrote slowly. "Your father sounds like a man who loved you very much and lost himself trying to hold on." Clara's breath caught. "Yes, that's exactly what he was." He wrote again. "I understand that, more than you know." And for the first time, he told her his story, briefly, in sentences that cost him something. Clara sat with him in that silence, not rushing to fill it, just present. After a long while, she said quietly, "You didn't deserve that." He looked away, but his hand, resting on the arm of his wheelchair, was trembling very slightly. Clara had a secret. Until she was 12, she had been partially deaf. Bad ear infections left untreated when her family had no money for doctors. She had learned to lip read. She had learned the loneliness of a world that keeps talking without you. Then her mother found Dr. Samuel Holt, an audiologist in Philadelphia, who understood how trauma and stress were connected to hearing loss. Over 8 months of gentle sessions, Clara's hearing came back, fully, completely. When she learned the nature of Elliot's deafness, stress-induced, triggered by trauma, something in her went very still. "I know this," she thought. "I have been here." She brought her notepad to his room one afternoon and held up a small tuning fork she had ordered online. "I used to be partially deaf. A doctor helped me. I want to try some of his methods with you. Simple, gentle, no pressure." He wrote one word. "Why? Because I think some part of you is still in that room 3 years ago. And I think your body is waiting for permission to come back." A long pause. Then, "The best doctors in New York have already tried. I know I am not a doctor, but I was you once, and I came back." He looked at her. Then, slowly, he held out his hand for the tuning fork. It was a Wednesday night, the penthouse quiet in a way it never was when Vivian was home. Just the two of them and the city glowing 42 floors below. Clara had made dinner. Pasta, warm bread, a candle she found at the back of a drawer. After dinner, she came back to find him by the window and stood beside him, looking out at the same skyline. She bent to straighten the blanket across his lap. And that was when it happened. His hand, resting open on the arm of his chair, moved. Slowly. His fingers found hers. Clara went very still, not from fear. She went still the way you go still when something so right happens that your whole body needs a moment to believe it is real. She straightened slowly. She did not pull her hand away. She sat carefully on the arm of his chair, and he moved his wheelchair just slightly to make room for her. She understood that as the most tender thing she had ever seen a person do. He balanced the notepad on his knee and wrote with one hand. "I have been trying not to feel this." "Me too," she said softly. You deserve someone who can give you everything. I am a man in a wheelchair who cannot hear your voice." She took the notepad and wrote her reply. "I don't need everything. I just need you." Elliot looked at those 5 words for a long time. Then he reached up slowly and touched her face, his thumb brushing her cheek so gently it was barely there, like he was checking she was real. He leaned forward. She leaned in to meet him. It was the softest, most careful kiss Clara had ever known. Not rushed, not desperate, just honest, carrying everything 2 people had not been able to say. Every quiet look, every notepad exchange, every moment one of them almost reached for the other and stopped themselves. All of it, finally, released. When they pulled apart, Clara rested her forehead against his. Neither of them moved to let go. He wrote one word: alive. That night she fell asleep beside him, her cheek resting against his shoulder. Elliot stayed awake long after. He picked up the notepad and wrote something. Not for her, just for himself. She stayed. Then he set the notepad down. And for the first time in 3 years, Elliot Ashford closed his eyes with something other than emptiness waiting for him on the other side. 3 weeks in, Vivian returned from a trip in a sharp mood. She found the penthouse clean, her husband calm, Clara reading quietly, and somehow this bothered her more than disorder would have. "You're not special," she told Clara in the kitchen. "You're temporary. Don't forget that." That same evening, with her bedroom door open, Vivian's voice drifted down the hallway. "The clause expires in 6 weeks, Daniel." A cold laugh. "He's in his chair by the window like always. Sometimes I think he's already gone and just hasn't fallen over yet." Clara walked on quickly, her heart beating hard. Something was very wrong in this house. 6 weeks. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she filed it away. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in the 5th week. Vivian came out of her bedroom just as Clara stepped into the hallway, and something in her snapped. "You think he's going to save you? He can't even save himself. He is nothing." "That's enough," Clara said quietly. The words, calm, firm, unafraid, hit something raw in Vivian. Her hand came up. The slap caught Clara across the cheek with a crack that rang off the marble. Clara stumbled, her shoulder hitting the wall. From the end of the hallway, Elliot's door opened. He had felt the vibration. In the past week, quietly, certain sounds had started returning. Fragments. The crack of a hand on a face. He pushed hard down the hallway toward them. Vivian laughed. "Go back to your window, Elliot." But Elliot was looking at Clara, at her hand pressed to her cheek, and something so fierce moved across his face that Vivian took one step back. He tried to push himself up from the chair. He rose 2 inches before his balance failed. He went down hard. Marcus, the building's driver, found them both on the floor. Elliot, with blood at his temple, Clara's cheek bruised and swelling. Within 12 minutes, both were in an ambulance. St. Vincent's private wing. 2 rooms side by side. Vivian arrived 3 hours later with white lilies and practiced devastation. She touched Elliot's face. "My darling, I've been beside myself." She felt him go very still. Something in his eyes had changed. She pulled back, kissed his forehead, and walked out. In the hallway, she typed quickly on her phone. He looked at me strangely. Does he suspect something? Daniel's reply, Impossible. He cannot hear. He does not know anything. She did not know that in the room behind her, Elliot Ashford had watched her lips as she typed. He had been lip-reading for 3 years. He read Daniel's name. He read the message. He lay back and looked at the ceiling. His jaw tightened. Next door, Clara received a note from a nurse. "Are you all right?" she wrote back. "I am fine. You are the one who hit the floor." "How is your head?" He wrote. "I fell, but I don't regret it. Standing up for you was worth more than my pride." That night, Elliot lay awake for a long time. For the first time in 3 years, he did not feel like a man at the end of something. He felt distantly, strangely, like a man at the beginning. By the 3rd day, Clara was well enough to sit beside his bed each evening, reading aloud from a novel, slowly, facing him so he could follow her lips. She paused at the end of a chapter and looked up. He was watching her, not the book, her. Something in the air changed. He reached out slowly and took her hand. Then he held up the notepad. "I have never met anyone like you. In my whole life. You are the first person in years who has seen me. Not the money, not the chair. Me." He wrote again. "May I?" "Yes," she breathed. He leaned forward slowly, and she met him halfway. It was the gentlest kiss. Just 2 people who had both been so lonely for so long, finding something they had not known they were still looking for. When they parted, Elliot opened his eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, fully, all the way to his eyes, he smiled. Clara felt something open in her chest, like a window thrown wide on the first morning of spring. He wrote one word: stay. Later that night, Elliot took her hand and wrote something that made her go very still. "I know what Vivian is doing. I need evidence, the kind that holds in court. I need you to go back, not as a caregiver, but as my eyes. They talk openly because they think I cannot hear." Vivian uses the laptop on the kitchen counter. Her password is our wedding anniversary. They have been moving money out of the company for over a year. The clause in my father's will expires in 6 weeks. I do not think they intend to wait. Clara stared at those words. His eyes were steady, clear. The eyes of a man who had decided to stop waiting and start acting. "Are you afraid?" she wrote. "No. I have something to live for now. I am with you. Go. Be careful. Do not let them see you watching." She squeezed his hand, stood up, and walked out like a woman with a purpose. Clara returned to the penthouse. Steady, careful. She kept her head down and her eyes open. She recorded Vivian telling Daniel she was pregnant. "The timing has to be perfect, 2 weeks from now, and everything falls to us." She photographed offshore account numbers and transfer records from the open laptop while Vivian slept. And then she recorded Daniel arriving at midnight. Vivian's voice, low and certain in the kitchen. "After the clause expires, we adjust his dosage. Gradual. By the time anyone notices, it will already be done. And if anything goes wrong, we have a caregiver living right there in the penthouse. The doctors will say it was complications from his condition." Clara's hand was shaking when she stopped the recording. She sent everything to Elliot's encrypted email, just as he had told her. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, her mother's voice in her head, saying, "Be brave, be brave, be brave." She was. What Clara did not know was that while she gathered evidence, something was happening to Elliot. The tuning fork sessions, the sound therapy, the quiet patient work of weeks. Dr. Holt's methods were not just about the ears. They were about the story the nervous system was telling itself. And somewhere in those final weeks, with Clara's hand in his and the memory of her kiss still warm, Elliot's nervous system had quietly changed its story. One morning he woke and heard the city. Faint, distant, a bus, a horn, music drifting up from the floor below. He covered his mouth with his hand. Dr. Holt arrived the next day, ran every test, and sat back with the satisfied expression of a man who had always believed. "You are coming back," he said simply. By the end of that week, Elliot Ashford was standing. His legs shook. He fell once and got back up. And on the morning Vivian left for her final wellness weekend, Elliot walked, slowly but upright, to the window. He stood in the morning light. He looked out at the city, and he breathed. Monday morning, Ashford Capitol, 44th floor. The elevator opened and every head turned. Elliot Ashford walked in. No wheelchair, no aid, just a man in a dark suit, moving with a careful gait and eyes that swept the room like he was seeing it properly for the first time. The silence was absolute. His executive assistant, Patricia, 60 years old, 20 years with the company, unshakable, put her hand over her mouth. Elliot stopped in the center of the room and said, in a voice still rough from 3 years of disuse, "Good morning." Two people began crying immediately. Patricia crossed the floor and took his hands in both of hers. Elliot squeezed her hands. Then he turned. "I would like to introduce my new personal assistant. She starts today." The elevator doors opened. Clara stepped out, not like a caregiver, not like a young woman from a small apartment in the Bronx, but like exactly what she was, a woman who had walked through fire and come out steady. "There are going to be some changes here," Elliot said, "starting today." Vivian arrived at 11:15 with Daniel 2 steps behind her, both wearing the confidence of people who believe the story is already written in their favor. "I am sorry, Mrs. Ashford. I have been told not to allow you entry today." She pulled out her phone. "He is at home in his wheelchair. I will call him right now." She dialed. It rang once, twice. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Elliot was walking across the lobby, steady, upright, her phone still ringing in her hand, because the man she had just called was standing right in front of her. The look on Vivian's face moved through shock to confusion, to the specific terror of someone who realizes the trap they laid was always meant for them. "Elliot," her voice broke. "My love, oh God." "I can hear you, Vivian." A pause. "I have been able to hear you for 2 weeks. Another pause. "I have heard everything." Vivian's face drained of color. $41,600,000, Elliot said, turning to Daniel. "That is what the forensic accountants found. Did I miss anything?" The lobby doors opened. 4 agents in dark jackets. A badge. "Vivian Ashford, Daniel Mercer, you are both under arrest." The charges were federal: embezzlement, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder. When the last charge was read aloud in the courtroom, the gallery went silent, a collective breath, as people realized this had also been, almost, the story of a man who nearly did not make it out. The evidence was overwhelming. Clara's recordings and Elliot's own recordings from the penthouse, captured in those final 2 weeks when he sat still and silent and apparently deaf, hearing every word. His own silence, his own apparent weakness, used as his most powerful weapon. They were each sentenced to 20 years. The divorce was granted on a Thursday. Elliot signed the papers and felt nothing but a long, slow relief, like setting down something so heavy he had forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. That evening he called Clara. "It is done. I know, I watched. I would like to take you to dinner, somewhere with a tablecloth and a candle and a waiter who is unnecessarily formal." She laughed. It was the best sound he had ever heard. The restaurant had white tablecloths and a pianist. At the end of the evening, Elliot stood up, held out his hand, and said, "Bear with me." They swayed slowly to something soft and forgiving. "I owe you my life," he murmured. "You owe me nothing," she said. "You found your own way back. You lit the path." "I am in love with you," he said, simply, like a fact. "Fully, completely, without a single doubt in love with you, Clara Bennett." "Elliot Ashford," she said softly, "I have been in love with you since you let me clean up your broken dishes without throwing me out." He laughed, genuinely, fully. Then he kissed her on the dance floor, in front of the pianist and the couples who pretended not to look and absolutely looked. One Sunday, he came with her to the Bronx. Good coat, peeling paint, engineering diagrams pinned to every wall. Lily arrived home and looked at him with the directness of someone not impressed by money. "Lily Bennett, your company's scholarship program funded my place at NYU. Elliot Ashford, your sister saved my life." Lily glanced at Clara. "She does that." Then, "Are you staying for dinner? We have pasta." "I would love pasta," Elliot said. And the three of them sat in that small kitchen, and it was the best meal he had eaten in years. It happened in the garden, a small courtyard behind the brownstone Elliot had bought in the West Village, because Clara had once mentioned she had always wanted to live somewhere with a garden, and Elliot had written it down. An ordinary Sunday in October. Clara had her hands in the earth, completely unaware of being watched, and Elliot stood in the doorway knowing with complete certainty what he was about to do. He walked out. She looked up. He lowered himself to one knee on the grass, his grandmother's sapphire ring in his hand. "I am not a perfect man. I have been broken and difficult, and I threw a great many plates, which I think you will agree was excessive." A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. "But I have never been more certain of anything than I am of you, Clara Bennett. Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to give the world back to you?" She knelt down and held his face in her hands, her hands still dirty from the garden. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring on her finger. The October leaves fell around them, and neither of them noticed at all. They married in spring, small and real, Lily in cornflower blue, Dr. Holt with his careful smile, Patricia with a monogrammed handkerchief, Marcus, the driver, in a borrowed suit. Lily walked Clara down the aisle. Elliot stood at the front and felt, for the first time since he was a younger man, that the world was, in fact, mostly good. You just had to find the right person to show it to you. He told her, "You were the light in the longest dark." She told him, "You were worth every single broken plate." Everyone laughed. 11 months later, a girl at 742, a boy at 758. They named them Rose and George. Elliot sat in the hospital bed, holding one baby in each arm. This man who had once sat alone in a penthouse 42 floors above a city, waiting for something to end, and looked up at Clara with an expression that had no word in any language he knew. And she leaned down and kissed him, and the babies slept between them. 2 years later, Lily walked across a graduation stage, mechanical engineering, top of her class. When they called her name, Clara was on her feet before anyone else, clapping until her hands were red. Lily found them afterward and held her certificate up. "For Mom and Dad," she said, then softer, "For us." That evening, Elliot came home to a house full of noise, Lily explaining engines to a 2-year-old who was ignoring her, George asleep in the dog's bed, a large golden retriever named Plates sprawled underfoot. Clara was in the kitchen. "Hard day?" "No, a good day." He wrapped his arms around her from behind and stood there with his eyes closed, thinking about a man in a wheelchair by a window, a girl with a tuning fork and steady hands. All the broken things, plates and lives and long silences, and what they become when someone refuses to leave. "Clara." "Thank you for staying." She turned and kissed him, right there in the kitchen, with the dog underfoot and the children noisy and everything. Absolutely everything, exactly as it should be. Some people spend their lives waiting to be saved. Some people are the saving. And some, the luckiest ones, learn in the end that they are both. If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there is sitting in their own quiet room, convinced that they are too broken to be loved, too tired to keep going, too far gone to come back. Send it to them, because sometimes the most powerful thing one person can do for another is simply say, without words, without pressure, without conditions, "I see you. I am not going anywhere. I am with you in this." That is enough. That has always been enough.